The sketchbook fell from Beatrice Parker's lap when the wind gusted across the hillside, and she scrambled after it with both hands outstretched, her dark blonde hair whipping free from its pins. She caught the leather-bound book just before it tumbled into a patch of prickly pear cactus, clutching it to her chest as she laughed at her own clumsiness. The year was 1878, and she had traveled all the way from Boston to this wild corner of California near Chico, sent by her ailing aunt to recuperate in the dry air after a winter spent coughing into handkerchiefs. The landscape here was nothing like the ordered streets and proper parks back home. Here, the sky stretched endlessly overhead, filled with cloud formations that seemed to tell stories she could barely comprehend. Beatrice settled herself more firmly on the flat rock she had claimed as her viewing perch, spreading her skirts carefully around her legs. She was 22 years old and had spent most of those years learning to be a proper young lady, which meant she knew how to play piano tolerably well, could embroider a handkerchief with delicate stitches, and understood which fork to use at dinner parties. None of those skills seemed particularly useful here in the wide open spaces of Northern California, where her aunt's small ranch house sat isolated among the rolling hills dotted with oak trees. But drawing, that was something Beatrice could do anywhere. Her pencil moved across the paper in quick, sure strokes as she captured the way cumulus clouds piled high like castle towers in the afternoon sky. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her. The animal snorted, and Beatrice looked up with a startled gasp to find a man sitting astride a bay gelding, watching her with an expression of intense curiosity. He was tall even sitting down, with broad shoulders filling out a worn work shirt and a hat pushed back far enough that she could see his face clearly. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. Instead, he seemed frozen, staring at her sketchbook with an expression she could not quite read. "I apologize for startling you, miss," he said, his voice deep and rough around the edges. "I did not mean to intrude. I was just riding the property line when I saw you up here." Beatrice pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing beneath her fingers. "You frightened me half to death," she said, then realized how rude that sounded. "I mean, I did not hear you coming. I was concentrating on the clouds." The man's gaze shifted from her sketchbook to the sky above, then back down again. "Those are mighty interesting clouds you were drawing," he said. "May I ask what you see in them?" It was an odd question, different from the polite dismissals she usually received when people caught her sketching. Most folks thought it was a harmless enough pastime for a young woman, but nothing worth serious discussion. This stranger seemed genuinely interested in her answer. "I see formations," Beatrice said, warming to the subject despite her lingering nervousness. "The way they build and change. These are cumulus clouds, which means fair weather, but you can see how they are stacking higher in the west. That might mean a change coming in a day or two. And the patterns they make, well, they remind me of landscapes. Mountains and valleys, all shifting and transforming." The man dismounted in one smooth motion, looping his horse's reins over a low branch. He approached slowly, as if worried about frightening her again. "Would you mind if I looked at your drawings more closely? I promise I am not some sort of scoundrel. My name is Thomas Peterson, and I own the ranch that borders your aunt's property to the north. You must be Miss Parker, the niece from back east that everyone in town has been talking about." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "They have been talking about me. Whatever for?" Thomas Peterson smiled for the first time, and those lines around his eyes deepened. "Chico is a small town, Miss Parker. When someone new arrives, especially a young lady from Boston. People take notice. Your aunt mentioned you were staying with her for your health." She nodded, feeling self-conscious about her pallor. Even after 2 weeks in California, she still looked like someone who had spent too much time indoors. The doctors recommended a change of climate. My aunt was kind enough to invite me to stay as long as I needed. Thomas stepped closer, and Beatrice found herself tilting the sketchbook so he could see it better. He studied the page with the same intense focus he had shown earlier, his brow furrowed in concentration. The drawing showed the clouds she had been observing, rendered in careful detail with shading to show their depth and volume. But she had added something extra, a kind of interpretation where the shapes suggested a future landscape, roads winding through valleys that existed only in vapor and imagination. "This is remarkable," Thomas said quietly. "You do not just draw what you see, you draw what could be." Beatrice felt a flutter of something she could not quite name in her chest. No one had ever understood her sketches quite that way before. "I suppose I do," she admitted. "I have always seen possibilities in things. Clouds are perfect for that because they are never fixed. They are always becoming something else." Thomas looked up at her, and their eyes met. His were a deep brown, like rich soil after rain, and they held a warmth that made her feel suddenly aware of how alone they were on this hillside. Propriety dictated she should excuse herself, return to her aunt's house, maintain the proper distance between an unmarried woman and a man she had just met. But something kept her rooted to her spot on the rock. "I wonder," Thomas said slowly, "if you might be willing to show me more of your drawings sometime. I have a feeling there is something in them I need to see." It was a strange thing to say, and Beatrice almost laughed at the seriousness with which he said it. But there was no mockery in his expression, only genuine interest and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "I suppose that would be acceptable," Beatrice said, trying to sound casual even though her heart was beating faster again. "Perhaps I could visit your ranch if that would be proper. My aunt could accompany me as chaperone." Thomas nodded quickly as if worried she might change her mind. "That would be fine, very fine indeed. Would tomorrow be too soon?" "I know it seems forward, but I would very much like to continue this conversation." Beatrice found herself agreeing before she had fully thought it through, and they made arrangements for her aunt to bring her to the Peterson ranch the following afternoon. As Thomas rode away, raising his hand in farewell, Beatrice remained on her rock, staring after him with her sketchbook forgotten in her lap. She had come to California expecting nothing more than dry air and quiet recuperation. She had not expected to meet a rancher who looked at her drawings as if they contained answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. That evening, over supper at her aunt's simple wooden table, Beatrice tried to explain the encounter without sounding too eager or too interested. Her aunt, Martha Parker, was a widow of 55 with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She had run her small ranch alone since her husband died 5 years earlier, managing with the help of 2 hired hands and sheer stubborn determination. "Thomas Peterson is a good man," Martha said, passing Beatrice a bowl of beans. "Came out here from Missouri about 8 years ago with enough money to buy land and big dreams about building something lasting. He has worked hard, built up a fine herd of cattle, and earned respect from everyone in the county. He is also unmarried, in case you were wondering, which I suspect you were." Beatrice nearly choked on her water. "Aunt Martha, I was not, I just met the man. He was interested in my drawings, that is all." Martha's smile suggested she knew better. "Your drawings? Right. Well, he has never shown interest in any young lady's drawings before, I can tell you that. There have been plenty of women in town who have tried to catch his eye over the years. He is always polite, always respectful, but never interested. Until now, apparently. He wants me to visit his ranch tomorrow, Beatrice admitted, to show him more of my sketches. Would you be willing to come with me as chaperone? Of course, Martha said. I have been meaning to discuss some fence line matters with him anyway. It will give me a good excuse. She paused, studying Beatrice with those keen eyes. Just be careful with your heart, dear. I know the West seems romantic and exciting compared to Boston, but life out here is hard. Men like Thomas Peterson need wives who can handle that hardness, who will not wilt at the first sign of difficulty. Beatrice wanted to protest that she was not some fragile flower, but the words stuck in her throat. Was she not here precisely because she had wilted back in Boston, her health failing under the weight of city life? What did she know about hardship, really? She had grown up in comfort, surrounded by servants and society. The roughest thing she had ever done was walk through a park in weather that was not quite pleasant. That night, lying in her narrow bed listening to coyotes howl in the distance, Beatrice thought about Thomas Peterson's face when he looked at her drawings. She thought about the way he had said she drew what could be, not just what was. And she wondered what he had seen in those cloud formations, what future he had glimpsed in her interpretation of vapor and light. The next day dawned clear and bright, with just a hint of the heat that would build as summer progressed. Beatrice changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that was nice enough to be respectful, but not so fancy as to seem pretentious. She pinned her hair up carefully, trying to tame the waves that wanted to escape and curl around her face. Then she gathered all her sketchbooks, not just the one from yesterday, but all 5 that she had filled since arriving in California. Martha drove them to the Peterson ranch in her small wagon, the 2 horses plodding steadily along the dirt road that wound through hills covered in golden grass. As they crested a rise, Beatrice saw the ranch spread out below them, and her breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful in a way she had not expected. The main house was built of wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, offering shade and a view of the valley. Several outbuildings dotted the property, all well-maintained and carefully arranged. Corrals held horses and cattle, and she could see men working in the distance, small figures moving with purpose. Thomas came out to meet them as Martha pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He had cleaned up since yesterday, wearing a fresh shirt and pants that looked newer than his work clothes, though he still had the same well-worn boots and hat. He helped both women down from the wagon with easy courtesy, but Beatrice noticed the way his hand lingered just a moment longer when he took hers. "Thank you for coming, Miss Parker, Mrs. Parker," he said. "Please, come inside. I have lemonade cooling in the spring house." The interior of the house surprised Beatrice. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but instead found rooms that were simple yet comfortable, with good furniture and clean floors. The main room had large windows that let in plenty of light, and she noticed books on shelves, actual books in a rancher's home, which somehow made her like Thomas Peterson even more. Martha excused herself quickly, claiming she needed to find Thomas's foreman to discuss those fence matters, leaving Beatrice alone with Thomas in a way that was just barely acceptable. The door remained open, and they could hear Martha's voice calling for the foreman outside, so propriety was technically maintained. Thomas brought the lemonade, pouring it into glasses with hands that seemed too large and work-roughened for such delicate tasks. They sat at his table, and Beatrice arranged her sketchbooks in front of her, suddenly feeling vulnerable and exposed. "I brought all of them," she said. "Everything I have drawn since coming to California. I do not know exactly what you are looking for, but perhaps you will find it here." Thomas opened the first sketchbook carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. He turned the pages slowly, studying each drawing with that same intense focus she had noticed yesterday. Beatrice watched him, trying to read his expression, but he had gone still and quiet in a way that made her nervous. The sketches showed various scenes from around her aunt's ranch and the surrounding countryside. There were landscapes and studies of oak trees, drawings of horses and cattle, and many studies of clouds in different formations and conditions. But woven through all of them was that same quality Thomas had identified, that sense of possibility and transformation. She drew not just what existed, but what could exist, the potential she saw hidden in the shapes and shadows. "This one," Thomas said finally, pointing to a drawing Beatrice had made a week ago. It showed a view from a hilltop looking down into a valley, but she had added structures that were not there, buildings and fences and roads laid out in careful detail among the clouds that hung over the landscape. "Where is this?" "That is the big valley on the eastern edge of my aunt's property," Beatrice said. "But the buildings are just my imagination. I was thinking about how the land could be developed if someone wanted to. There is a good stream running through there and the ground looks fertile. It seems like it could support crops or more grazing." Thomas's hand trembled slightly as he touched the page. "I own that valley now," he said quietly. "I bought the land from the previous owner 3 months ago, and this layout you have drawn, this is almost exactly what I have been planning. The placement of the barn, the house, the corrals, everything. How could you have known?" Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the day. "I could not have known," she said. "I just drew what seemed right, what the land seemed to be asking for. I do that sometimes. I see not what is, but what wants to be." Thomas looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Turn to the middle of the second book," he said. About halfway through, she did, her hands fumbling with the pages. When she found the middle section, she saw a series of drawings she had done of a house, a large house with multiple wings and a grand porch, situated on a rise with oak trees surrounding it. She had spent hours on these sketches, refining the details, though she had no idea why. It was just a house her imagination had conjured, a dream rendered in pencil and paper. "That is the house I have been planning to build," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have drawings in my desk, plans I commissioned from an architect in Sacramento. They are not identical to yours, but the spirit of them, the feeling, it is exactly the same. The way the house sits on the land, the relationship to the trees, the view it commands. You have drawn my dream, Miss Parker." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have said exactly why. "I do not understand," she whispered. "How is this possible?" Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, a bold gesture that should have shocked her but instead felt perfectly natural. "I have been praying for guidance," he said. "I have been asking for a sign that I am building the right thing, making the right choices with this land. And then you appear, sketching clouds on the hillside, and in your drawings I see everything I have been hoping for. You are the answer I did not know how to ask for." "That seems like a great deal to put on some simple sketches," Beatrice said, but her voice wavered. She could feel something shifting between them, something significant and frightening and wonderful all at once. "Look at this one," Thomas said, turning more pages until he found another drawing. This one showed people, small figures she had added almost as an afterthought, a man and woman standing together looking out over a landscape. She had drawn them from behind, so their features were not visible, but there was something about their posture, the way they stood close together, that suggested intimacy and partnership. "That could be anyone," Beatrice protested weakly. "Could it?" Thomas asked. "Or is it us?" Is it the future you saw when you drew these clouds, this land, these dreams? Beatrice wanted to laugh at the impossibility of it all, but she found she could not. Because looking at the drawings with Thomas beside her, feeling the warmth of his hand still holding hers, she could almost believe it. She had drawn these things in moments of quiet inspiration, when her mind wandered and her pencil moved almost without conscious thought. What if she had been seeing something real? What if the clouds had shown her true formations, not of vapor but of destiny? "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "This is all very strange and sudden. We met only yesterday." "I know," Thomas said. "And I know I am probably frightening you with the intensity of all this. But I have learned that out here in this wild country, sometimes you have to recognize opportunity when it appears. Sometimes you have to take chances that would seem foolish anywhere else." He paused, then added more quietly, "I am not proposing marriage to you right now, Miss Parker. That would be absurd. But I am asking permission to court you properly, to spend time with you and see if what I feel, what I see in your drawings, might grow into something real between us." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger and rougher than hers, marked by work and weather. Then she looked up at his face, at the hope and vulnerability she saw there. Thomas Peterson was a successful rancher, a man of property and standing in the community. He could have his choice of women, but he was asking her, the sickly girl from Boston who drew clouds and imagined futures. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "Yes, you may court me. I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like sunrise, warm and brilliant and full of promise. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it, sitting back in his chair with a deep breath. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea what this means to me." Martha returned then, her timing so perfect that Beatrice suspected she had been waiting outside just long enough to give them privacy for an important conversation. She looked between them, noting their expressions and the way they sat leaning slightly toward each other, and her own smile suggested approval. Over the next few weeks, Thomas courted Beatrice with a determination that was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. He appeared at Martha's ranch almost daily, always with some plausible excuse. He needed to discuss water rights or fence repairs or cattle movements. But after conducting his business with Martha, he would invariably ask if Beatrice might like to take a walk, or perhaps do some sketching, and could he accompany her. They walked the hills together, Thomas pointing out features of the landscape while Beatrice sketched. He told her about his plans for the ranch, the dreams he had for building something lasting, creating a legacy. And Beatrice found herself sharing things she had never told anyone else, her frustrations with the limited life expected of her in Boston, her fear that her illness meant she was fundamentally weak, her secret hope that maybe out here in the West she could become someone stronger. "You are already strong," Thomas told her one afternoon as they sat on a hillside watching clouds build in the west. "Strength is not about never being sick or never struggling. It is about getting up every day and choosing to keep going. You left everything familiar and traveled thousands of miles to a place you had never seen. That took courage. Or desperation," Beatrice said wryly. "I could barely breathe in Boston by the end. The doctors said another winter there might kill me." "But you did not just lie down and accept it," Thomas insisted. "You fought. You are fighting still, every day you choose to be here to try this different life. That is strength, Beatrice." He had started using her first name after the second week of courtship, and she had given him permission to do so as long as they were alone or just with Martha. Hearing him say her name in that deep, warm voice made something flutter in her chest every time. "I want to show you something," Thomas said, standing and offering her his hand. "It is a bit of a ride, but I think you will find it worth the trip." They rode together, Beatrice on a gentle mare that Thomas had chosen specially for her, to the eastern valley she had sketched weeks before. As they crested the rise and looked down into the broad expanse of land, Beatrice caught her breath. Stakes had been driven into the ground in a pattern that exactly matched her drawing, marking out where buildings would go, where fences would run, where the future would take shape. "I am starting construction next month," Thomas said. "The big house first, then the outbuildings. I want to have it ready before winter." "It will be magnificent," Beatrice said, already seeing in her mind's eye how it would look when completed. "Are you planning to live there yourself?" "I am planning to live there with my wife," Thomas said quietly. "When I find her." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. They had been courting for 3 weeks. It was far too soon for proposals, far too soon for such serious talk. And yet, nothing about their relationship had followed normal timelines or expectations. From the moment he found her sketching clouds, they had been moving at their own pace, following some pattern only they could see. 3 weeks is not very long to know someone, Beatrice said carefully. "No," Thomas agreed. "It is not. But I have lived 30 years on this earth, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I see you in everything I am building. When I imagine that house finished, I imagine you on the porch. When I think about the future of this ranch, I think about sharing it with you. Your drawings showed me my own dreams, but better, fuller. They showed me what was missing, and that was you." Beatrice turned in her saddle to look at him fully. "I am not well," she said bluntly. "You know that. I came here because I was dying in Boston. What if I cannot give you children? What if I am too weak to be a rancher's wife?" "Then we will face that together," Thomas said. "But I do not believe you are weak, Beatrice. I think you are the strongest person I have ever met, and you do not even realize it yet. As for children, they would be a blessing, but they are not why I want to marry you. I want to marry you because when I am with you, the world makes sense in a way it never has before. I want to marry you because you see possibilities where others see only clouds. I want to marry you because I am in love with you, and I hope, you might be falling in love with me too." The tears came then, sliding down Beatrice's cheeks even as she smiled. "It is too soon," she said. "Everyone will say it is too soon. My family back in Boston will think I have lost my mind." "That is not an answer," Thomas said gently. "Do you love me, Beatrice?" She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like one of her cloud formations, solid and real but somehow also magical. She thought about the way he listened when she talked about her art. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how seen and valued. She thought about the future she had drawn without knowing it was his future, their future perhaps. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you understood what my drawings meant." Thomas dismounted in one fluid motion and came to her side, helping her down from her horse. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt like coming home. "Then marry me," he said against her hair. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Marry me and help me build this dream we both seem to share. Be my partner, my love, my wife." Beatrice pulled back just enough to see his face. "Yes," she said, the word coming easier this time. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Beatrice felt something settle in her chest, some piece of herself she had not known was displaced clicking into place. This was right. This was what her clouds had been telling her all along. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Chico, with half the town in attendance despite the short acquaintance. Martha stood up with Beatrice, beaming with satisfaction at having brought her niece all the way from Boston only to lose her to the neighboring rancher. Thomas's foreman served as his best man, and the preacher, who had known Thomas since he first arrived in California, pronounced them husband and wife with tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would see this day," the old preacher said to them after the ceremony. Thomas Peterson, confirmed bachelor, brought to the altar by a girl who draws clouds. The Lord works in mysterious ways indeed. The house in the valley was not yet finished, so they moved into Thomas's existing house, the one Beatrice had visited on that first day. But every Sunday after church, they would ride out to the building site and watch the progress. The frame was up now, the bones of the house emerging from the earth just as Beatrice had drawn it. She brought her sketchbooks and made new drawings, showing Thomas details she had not included before, suggestions for windows and doors and the arrangement of rooms. "You have an architect's eye," the actual architect told her when he visited from Sacramento to check on the construction. "Have you had training?" "Only in the art of seeing what could be," Beatrice said, and Thomas squeezed her hand. That first year of marriage was both harder and more wonderful than Beatrice had imagined. There were times when her health faltered, when she spent days in bed coughing and weak. Thomas would sit beside her, reading aloud from books or newspapers, holding her hand through the worst of it. And there were times when the loneliness of ranch life pressed down on her, when she missed the society and culture of Boston, the theaters and libraries, and the simple proximity of other people. But there were more times when she stood on the porch of their growing house and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors she had never seen in the East. Times when she rode out with Thomas to check on the cattle and felt the strength returning to her body, the dry air healing her lungs in ways the Boston doctors had said was impossible. Times when she lay in her husband's arms at night and felt so completely loved and cherished that everything else faded to insignificance. She continued to draw, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with studies of the land and sky. And Thomas continued to find his future in her drawings, using them to guide decisions about where to plant which crops, how to route the roads, where to dig the wells. Other ranchers started to notice and would sometimes ask to see Beatrice's sketches before making their own plans. "Your wife has a gift," one old-timer told Thomas at a community gathering. "It is like she can see what the land wants to become." "I know," Thomas said, watching Beatrice across the room as she chatted with a group of women. "I knew it from the first moment I saw her work." In the spring of 1879, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. What if her weak constitution could not handle childbirth? What if she was not strong enough to carry a baby to term? But Thomas held her close and whispered reassurances, and the doctor in Chico, when consulted, said that her health had actually improved remarkably since her arrival in California. "Whatever you are doing here agrees with you, Mrs. Peterson," the doctor said. "I see no reason you should not have a healthy pregnancy, as long as you take reasonable care of yourself." The house in the valley was finished in June, just before the heat of summer made the work too difficult. They moved in with great ceremony, Martha and the ranch hands helping to transport furniture and belongings. Beatrice walked through the completed rooms and felt tears streaming down her face. It was exactly as she had drawn it, exactly as she had seen it in her mind's eye that day on the hillside. No, it was better, because it was real and solid and hers. Thomas found her standing in what would be the nursery, her hands pressed to her still flat belly. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am happy," Beatrice said. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy. Sometimes I am afraid it cannot last, that something will go wrong." "Things will go wrong," Thomas said practically, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Cattle will die, crops will fail, there will be hard years and struggles." But we will face them together, and on the other side, there will be moments like this. Moments of pure happiness that make all the hard times worth it. Their son was born in January of 1880, a squalling, red-faced boy they named Timothy. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Beatrice was sure she would not survive it. But Martha was there, and the doctor, and most importantly Thomas, who held her hand and told her she was strong enough, brave enough, fierce enough to bring their child into the world. And she was. When they placed the baby in her arms, Beatrice looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt something shift inside her. She had grown up thinking she was fragile, delicate, someone who needed to be protected and sheltered. But she had just done something impossibly hard, and she had survived. She was a mother now, a rancher's wife, a woman who had traveled across a continent and built a new life from nothing but dreams and determination. "He is beautiful," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion as he touched their son's tiny hand. "You are beautiful. You are amazing. Thank you for this gift." Beatrice smiled up at her husband, this man who had found her sketching clouds and seen in her drawings a future worth building. "Thank you for believing in me," she said. "Thank you for seeing me as strong when I could not see it myself." The years that followed were full, rich years that passed sometimes slowly and sometimes in a blur. Timothy grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy who loved to follow his father around the ranch. Beatrice's health continued to improve in the California climate, though she still had occasional bad spells that kept her in bed for a few days. She learned to manage a household, to supervise hired help, to keep accounts and plan menus and do all the thousand small tasks that kept a ranch running smoothly. But she never stopped drawing. If anything, her art evolved and deepened. She began to teach Timothy to sketch when he was old enough to hold a pencil, showing him how to really look at the world, to see not just what was, but what could be. And she started taking commissions from other ranchers and farmers, creating landscape plans based on her unique ability to perceive the potential in land and sky. In 1882, Beatrice gave birth to twin daughters, Rose and Ruby, and the house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt alive with noise and activity. Thomas hired more help, both for the ranch work and to assist Beatrice with the children. But Beatrice insisted on being involved in every aspect of their upbringing, determined that her daughters would grow up knowing they could be both strong and feminine, both capable and cultured. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and helping with the children. She aged gracefully, her hair going completely white but her energy seemingly inexhaustible. "You have built something good here," she told Beatrice one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. "I am proud of you, dear, proud of the woman you have become." "I could not have done it without you," Beatrice said. "If you had not invited me to California, if you had not brought me to Thomas's ranch that day, none of this would exist." "Perhaps," Martha said. "Or perhaps it would have happened anyway, just in a different way. I think you and Thomas were meant to find each other. The clouds would have brought you together eventually." When Timothy was 7 years old, he came running to his mother one afternoon with a piece of paper clutched in his hand. "Mama, look what I drew," he said breathlessly. Beatrice took the paper and studied it carefully. It showed the ranch house, but with additions she and Thomas had discussed but not yet started. An additional wing for guest rooms, a larger barn, expanded corrals. The details were crude, drawn with a child's hand, but the vision was clear. "This is very good," Beatrice said slowly. "Have you been listening to your father and me talk about these plans?" Timothy shook his head. "I just saw it in the clouds," he said matter-of-factly. "The way you taught me, I looked at the clouds and saw what they wanted to be, and then I drew it." Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. the same feeling she had experienced that first day when Thomas showed her how closely her drawings matched his plans. She had passed on more than just technique to her son. She had passed on the gift, whatever it was, that allowed her to see potential and possibility in vapor and light. Thomas, when she showed him the drawing that evening, looked at his son with wonder. "We are raising an architect," he said, "or a visionary, or both." "We are raising a boy who sees what could be," Beatrice said. Just like his mother, the twins proved to have their own gifts as they grew. Rose had an uncanny ability with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse or nervous cow. Ruby showed an early aptitude for numbers and organization, keeping elaborate records of her doll collection with the seriousness of a banker managing accounts. Beatrice watched her children develop and marveled at the unexpected ways they each embodied different aspects of her and Thomas. In the summer of 1885, when Timothy was 5 and the twins were 3, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt different, easier somehow. She barely suffered from morning sickness and continued her normal activities well into her 6th month. Thomas worried constantly, but Beatrice felt stronger than she ever had. Their second son, called Theodore after Thomas's father, was born in December, a healthy baby who nursed vigorously and slept well from the start. With 4 children now filling the house, life became even more chaotic and wonderful. Beatrice sometimes thought back to her younger self, the sickly girl in Boston who thought she might die before seeing her 23rd birthday, and marveled at the transformation. She was 30 now, the mother of 4 children, the wife of a prosperous rancher, and in better health than she had been in years. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management and Beatrice's guidance. They bought additional land, expanded their herds, and became one of the most successful operations in the county. Thomas insisted on giving Beatrice full credit for their success, telling anyone who would listen that his wife's ability to read the land and sky was the secret to everything they had built. "She drew our future before I even knew she existed," he would say. "And she continues to draw it, showing me possibilities I would never see on my own." Beatrice would always blush when he said such things, but privately she knew there was truth in it. Her drawings had become an integral part of how they made decisions about the ranch. Before starting any new project, she would spend time sketching, letting her intuition and observation guide her pencil. And more often than not, her drawings would reveal something important, some consideration they might have missed or opportunity they had not perceived. In 1887, a severe drought struck Northern California. Ranchers and farmers watched their crops wither and their cattle grow thin as water sources dried up. Thomas and Beatrice stood together on their porch one evening, looking out over the parched landscape, and Thomas voiced the fear that was keeping him awake at night. "If this continues through next year, we could lose everything," he said quietly. "I have been talking to the other ranchers, and no one knows what to do. We have never seen a drought this bad." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "Let me draw tomorrow," she said. "Let me see what the clouds and the land want to tell us." She spent the next day sketching, studying the sky and the landscape with intense focus. The clouds were sparse, thin wisps that spoke of continued dry weather. But as she drew, her pencil seemed to move of its own accord, adding details she had not consciously planned. Underground water sources, marked by subtle changes in vegetation and soil. Places where wells could be dug deep enough to reach reserves that the drought had not touched. Thomas took her drawings to a professional well digger, who confirmed that the locations Beatrice had marked were indeed promising. They invested what savings they had in drilling 3 new wells, places Beatrice's drawings indicated would yield water. Two of the three were successful, producing enough water to keep their cattle alive and even irrigate a small portion of their land. Other ranchers, seeing the Petersons' success, came begging to see Beatrice's drawings. She shared them freely, and many others found water where they had thought there was none. When the drought finally broke in the spring of 1888, the Peterson ranch emerged stronger than before, and Beatrice's reputation as someone with an almost mystical ability to read the land was firmly established. "You saved us," Thomas told her. "You saved not just our ranch but half the ranches in the county." "The clouds told me where to look," Beatrice said simply. "I just paid attention." As their children grew older, Beatrice and Thomas made sure they were educated not just in practical ranch skills but in literature, mathematics, science, and art. They hired a tutor to come to the ranch 3 days a week, and Beatrice supplemented with her own lessons in observation and drawing. She wanted her children to have opportunities she had not had, to choose their own paths rather than being limited by gender or circumstances. Timothy, at age 12, announced he wanted to study architecture formally and someday design buildings all over California. Rose declared she wanted to be a veterinarian, a profession almost unheard of for women but one Beatrice encouraged anyway. Ruby showed an interest in business and talked about running the ranch's accounts when she was older. And Theodore, still young, seemed content to follow his father everywhere and learn the practical work of ranching. "We have raised dreamers," Thomas said one night, watching their children around the dinner table as they argued enthusiastically about their various plans and ambitions. "We have raised believers," Beatrice corrected. "Children who believe in possibility, who see what could be rather than accepting what is. Is that not what you saw in my drawings all those years ago? The courage to believe in a future that did not yet exist." Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture so familiar after 11 years of marriage that the children barely noticed. "You are right, as always," he said, "and I would not have it any other way." In 1890, Martha died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 67. The loss hit Beatrice hard, grief washing over her in waves. Martha had been more than an aunt. She had been the catalyst for everything good in Beatrice's life, the one who had brought her to California and introduced her to Thomas. At the funeral, Beatrice stood beside her aunt's grave and thought about how much had changed since that sickly girl arrived from Boston 12 years earlier. "She was so proud of you," Thomas murmured, his arm around Beatrice's waist. "She told me so many times how watching you bloom and thrive was one of the great joys of her life." "I will miss her," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "I will miss her so much." But even in grief there was beauty. Martha had left her ranch to Beatrice, and they decided to keep it running rather than selling it, hiring a manager to oversee the daily operations. It meant their children would have an even larger legacy, more land and resources to build their own futures upon. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas's hair started going gray at the temples, and Beatrice found lines appearing on her own face, marks of laughter and sun and the passage of time. Their children grew into young adults with dreams and plans of their own. Timothy left for San Francisco at 18 to study architecture, and letters arrived regularly describing the buildings he was studying and designing. Rose applied to a veterinary program back east, one of the few that would consider a female student, and was accepted. Ruby stayed close to home, taking over more and more of the ranch's business operations and proving to have a brilliant mind for finance and planning. And Theodore, grown into a tall, strong young man of 14, seemed destined to inherit his father's love of the land itself. In 1895, 17 years after Thomas first found Beatrice sketching clouds, they celebrated their anniversary by riding out to the hillside where they had met. It had become a tradition, this annual pilgrimage to the place where everything began. They sat on the same rock where Beatrice had been perched that day, older now but still very much in love. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Giving up Boston, the life you could have had there?" Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the hills. "I was dying in Boston," she reminded him. "I gave up nothing and gained everything. A husband who loves me, children who amaze me, a life I could never have imagined for myself. No, I have no regrets at all." She pulled out her ever-present sketchbook and began to draw the clouds that were building in the west. After all these years, she still found endless fascination in their formations and transformations. Thomas watched her work, his expression soft with love and admiration. "What do you see today?" he asked, the same question he had asked on that first afternoon. Beatrice studied the clouds and her emerging drawing carefully. "I see our grandchildren," she said slowly. "I see this land continuing for generations, shaped by our family but also shaping them in turn. I see a future that honors the past while embracing change and possibility. I see love, Thomas. I see love that lasts beyond our lifetimes." "That is a good future," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "It is the future we built together," Beatrice replied. "Starting from the moment you trusted what you saw in a stranger's drawings. Starting from the moment you believed in possibility." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink and purple. Beatrice continued to sketch, her hand moving surely across the page, capturing not just what she saw but what she knew to be true. The land spread out before them, their ranch prospering in the valley below, smoke rising from the chimney of the house she had drawn into existence with nothing but pencil and vision. 2 years later, in 1897, Timothy returned from San Francisco with a young woman on his arm, an artist he had met at school. They were married on the ranch, and Beatrice looked at her son's bride and saw herself 20 years earlier, full of dreams and determination. Rose wrote from veterinary school that she was thriving, top of her class, despite the prejudices she faced. Ruby had taken a shine to the son of a neighboring rancher, a young man with a good head for business who treated her as an equal partner. And Theodore, now 16, was already managing large portions of the ranch operation with skill that surpassed many men twice his age. "We did well," Thomas said to Beatrice as they watched their children and their growing families gathered around the dinner table. "We built something that will last." "We are still building it," Beatrice corrected gently. "Every day is another brushstroke in the drawing, another cloud formation to interpret. The future is still becoming, still transforming, still full of possibility." In the spring of 1899, at the age of 43, Beatrice became a grandmother when Timothy and his wife welcomed a daughter. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Beatrice felt the circle complete in a way she had not expected. She had come to California 21 years earlier expecting to die. Instead, she had lived more fully than she had ever imagined possible. She had loved and been loved, created and built, dreamed and achieved. "What will you draw next?" Thomas asked her one evening as they sat on their porch, the porch she had sketched before it existed, watching yet another sunset paint the sky. Beatrice considered the question seriously. She was 43 years old in good health, with potentially decades of life still ahead of her. Her children were launched into their own lives, the ranch was prosperous and secure, and she had achieved more than she had ever thought to hope for. "What came next?" "Everything," she said finally, smiling at her husband. "I will draw everything still to come." The ranch's continued growth, our grandchildren's futures, the changes coming to California and the West. I will draw possibilities and dreams and all the futures we cannot yet see, but know are waiting to be discovered. Thomas leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet and familiar after 21 years of marriage. "Then I will build what you draw," he said, "just like I have been doing since the day I found you sketching cloud formations. And I will keep seeing our future in every cloud and landscape," Beatrice replied, "because that is what brought us together, and what will keep us together for all the years to come." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, stars beginning to emerge in the vast sky above. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their youngest children settling in for the night. From the bunkhouse came the sound of the ranch hands laughing and talking. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. And overhead, even in darkness, the clouds continued their endless transformation, shapes shifting and changing, always becoming something new. Beatrice reached for Thomas's hand, and he laced his fingers through hers. 21 years ago, she had been a stranger sketching alone on a hillside. Now she was home, surrounded by the life she had drawn into existence one cloud formation at a time. The girl from Boston who had come west to survive had instead learned to truly live, had found love in the most unexpected place, and had built a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The ranch that Thomas Peterson built with guidance from Beatrice's drawings became known throughout California as one of the finest in the state. But more than that, it became known as a place where dreams were taken seriously, where visions were honored, and where the future was always waiting to be discovered in the shapes of clouds and the possibilities of land. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Thomas and Beatrice would ride out to that same hillside. She would sketch the clouds, and he would look at her drawings and see their future, just as he had on that first afternoon. Because some things, the most important things, never changed. Love endured, dreams persisted, and the sky continued to offer its visions to those wise enough to look up and see what could be rather than only what was. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges no one could fully anticipate, the Peterson family stood ready. They had been taught by Beatrice to see possibility in clouds, to read the land for its hidden potential, and to believe in futures that did not yet exist. And they had learned from Thomas the value of hard work, the importance of building on solid ground, and the wisdom of trusting in visions even when they seemed impossible. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the entire Peterson family gathered at the ranch house. 3 generations sat together, sharing stories and dreams and plans for the years ahead. Beatrice looked around at all the faces, these people who existed because she had gotten on a train in Boston 21 years earlier, because she had chosen to sketch clouds on a hillside, because she had seen possibilities where others saw only vapor. "To the new century," Thomas said, raising his glass. "May it bring as much joy and blessing as the last one brought to this family." "To the future," Beatrice added, "which we draw into being one choice, one dream, one cloud formation at a time." The family echoed the toast, glasses clinking, children laughing, the warmth of home and love filling the house that had started as nothing more than pencil marks on paper. Outside, the clouds drifted across the night sky, invisible in darkness but still there, still transforming, still waiting to show their secrets to those who knew how to look. And in her lap, as always, Beatrice had her sketchbook. Tomorrow, she would climb that familiar hillside and draw the first clouds of the new century. She would see in them the continuing story of her family, the ongoing life of the ranch, and all the possibilities that the future held. Thomas would look at her drawings and see his dreams reflected and refined. Their children would learn from her example, and the legacy they had built together would continue to grow and evolve. The rancher had found her sketching cloud formations, and in her drawings he had seen his future. Together they had made that future real, solid, lasting. They had taken visions written in vapor and built them into earth and wood and stone. They had transformed possibility into reality through love, work, faith, and the courage to believe in what they saw in the shifting shapes above. As midnight struck and the new century began, Beatrice and Thomas stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the sky. The clouds were there, she knew, even if she could not see them in the darkness. Always there, always changing, always ready to reveal their secrets to those brave enough to look, to dream, to build. "I love you," Thomas whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Beatrice replied. "Today, tomorrow, and in all the futures I can see in the clouds." And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch, not the prosperity, not even the wonderful family they had created together. The greatest gift was this enduring love, this partnership that had started with clouds and drawings and had grown into something solid and real and lasting. The gift of being seen, truly seen, and loved for exactly who she was. The gift of finding someone who believed in her visions enough to help build them into reality. The Peterson Ranch would continue for many generations, through droughts and depressions, wars and changes, evolving with the times while maintaining the spirit of possibility and vision that Beatrice and Thomas had instilled in it. The descendants would tell the story of how it all began, how a rancher found a woman sketching clouds and saw in her drawings the future they would build together. But on that New Year's Eve in 1899, with the new century spreading out before them like a blank page, Beatrice and Thomas simply stood together and knew they were blessed. They had found each other against all odds, in a wild and beautiful place, united by the simple act of looking at clouds and seeing not just water vapor but destiny, not just formations but futures, not just sketches but the blueprint of a life worth living. And as the first day of the new century dawned, Beatrice did indeed climb that hillside with her sketchbook, Thomas beside her as always. She drew the clouds she saw there, and in them she saw years of continued happiness, grandchildren yet to be born, dreams yet to be dreamed, and a love that would endure as long as the hills themselves. Thomas looked at her drawing and smiled, seeing in it everything they had built and everything still to come. The future spread before them, vast as the California sky, and they would face it together, hand in hand, building their dreams one cloud formation at a time.